just want to say my mother is a former fifth grade teacher, and I can remember when I was in elementary school in the 70s. I graduated high school in the early 80s. There was always that one kid that was kind of hyper that had to go down to the nurse's office to take medication. But it seemed after I graduated in the 90s and the 2000s that seemed to have exploded, and you see more and more kids on Ritalin and those type of drugs. And Bob is making the argument that that's because of psychotropic drugs and other factors that's contributing to this. Bob, how are you?
Very good, Chris. How are you?
Thank you for being with us. Bob, as I said, is with Black and Blonde Media. Bob, I missed your bio, but we'll get to that. But I want to talk about this article because it's so important. Can you give the audience kind of the gist of what your argument is?
Sure. Well, we hear this term, school shootings, so that automatically implies the gun. That makes the gun the enemy, the perpetrator. It gives a life to the gun. But when you look at all of these school shootings, you look at some of these mass killings that go on and that have gone on in recent years. Again, you alluded to the point that when we were growing up, we didn't have school shootings. No, there was nobody in our class that would ever think of doing something like that.
That's correct.
But there was also a common denominator that the media and the activists have not shared with the American people, and it's a very important common denominator. All of these kids who've shot up schools, shot up movie theaters, they've all been on one or more psychotropic drugs, whether we're talking Ritalin, Adderall, Plaxil, or there's a whole laundry list of these drugs that these kids have been put on because they committed the ultimate crime of being hyper. We had this term that just sort of came out of nowhere in the early 2000s called ADHD. Attention Deficit Disorder. Attention is something that young children want. Whether we're talking little babies who cry too much or preschoolers all the way up through high school, especially in the high school years where the brains and the hormones are going crazy and developing. And so what do a lot of these parents do? Instead of sitting down and taking some time to spend time with your child, or in school, allowing them to have recess where they can have competitive sports like dodge and tag and things like that have been recently banned because they're too competitive. Now we've just decided to dope the kids down, make them more manageable, keep them under control. But the problem is, ADHD is not a disorder. They call it a disorder, but there's nothing scientifically proven to show that it's a disease. So what have they done? They've taken kids with perfectly good brains and have injected them with drugs, and drugs that when they don't have the desired effect. You put them on something else, but you're creating permanent damage to these kids and their brains, and eventually they snap.
Bob,
and when they snap, they have all kinds of things also that we didn't have when we were growing up. We didn't have access to the internet that had violent imagery, that had hypersexualized and movies and all these other messages that are coming and bombarding these young people that are going in conjunction with these psychotropic drugs that cause them to do the unimaginable, because now they can see it. They've been told that they are hyperactive, so they are forced to withdraw. And so they withdraw into these little worlds that produce these ticking time bombs.
Right.
And I'm sorry, I don't want to sound over dramatic, but if you look at what's really going on, the thousands of children around the country who have been pumped up with these drugs, they are literally ticking time bombs.
Bob, before you start, go into a little bit about these psychotropic drugs and some of the effects that they can have on these children, because you go a lot about that in your article. Talk a little bit about that, if you may.
Well, my wife Laura is an awesome researcher, and she found this man by the name of Peter Breggin. He's a doctor, and back in 2000, he testified in front of the House subcommittee about this very thing. And this back in 2000, nobody was listening to him. And he was just saying that you were taking these drugs and putting them into these young children. And these drugs, they're Schedule II narcotics. And a Schedule II narcotic, if you go to the various government websites that oversee medications, Schedule II drugs include street drugs like heroin, cocaine, methamphetamines. These drugs that they are giving these children, Ritalin, Adderall, these are the same types of damaging drugs that we wouldn't want our kids to buy off the street, but all they have to do is go in with their parents to a doctor's office and they get prescribed these.
Bob, what would you say to parents who may have a child that was diagnosed with ADHD or ADD who said that these drugs are working for their children and they've become manageable, and maybe there is no correlation between these drugs and some of these children's behavior, that the only correlation is that these kids are having mental issues and it's not the drugs that are affecting that? Well, what would you say to that argument?
Well, I would invite people to go to the piece. We link directly to Dr. Bregan's website. He is an authority on this, and I'm going to be very careful as to not speak as a medical doctor. But again, we as children knew that hyper kid, and being hyper is just a person who is either bored in class because the subject matter is just too slow for them. Actually, a lot of these kids are like really smart. They're just bored because they're stuck in a class that's not going at their speed, or they may have just a lot of energy that they want to expend, and it's just too much for the teacher to handle. So, hey, just send them someplace, get them drugged up so they will calm down. So I would invite people to go to Dr. Bregan's website. Again, we've linked to it in that piece. And he has gone through years, decades of dealing with talking to parents and trying to get them not to medicate their kids, because being a child is you wanted to go out and play. You want to have activity. And especially again back in the when you get to the later years of child development, where the hormones are going crazy. They're facing. I mean, we went through these things, Chris.
Yeah, I can give you a personal story, and we talked about it on the phone earlier. Is someone in my family was diagnosed with ADHD. They were very hyper in kindergarten and first grade. They were taken out of the public schools and were sent to another school that was better for their learning environment, because their parents said, I'm not going to put my child on drugs. That's just something I don't want to do. We're going to try another alternative. And ended up working for them. This child ended up graduating high school. He ended up going to college. Now he is an entrepreneur and doing quite well. So we've got about a minute left, but give everyone the website, Bob, where they can read up on this article and other articles that you have so they can get more information.
Sure, that would be great. Thanks, Chris. The website is Black and Blonde Media. That's blonde with an E. And it's blackandblondemedia.com. And as you were so gracious to tell everybody, the name of the piece is Why Children Snap and Kill. They've been doped up for decades. And it's true, and it's very sad, because there are children who are dying, babies who are going into comas because they cry too much. So their parents are talking to doctors who say, put them on this, put her on that. And then you get to the point where you have tragedies like what happened at high schools all over the country, and the one thing again they don't talk about, because in some cases they won't even release the medical records. We still don't have the medical records for Adam Lanza, who shot up Sandy Hook.
I heard that. Bob, we appreciate it. You and Laura are doing great work. You're blackandblondemedia.com. Appreciate you, and I hope that you'll become a guest or come back on in the future.
Call anytime. We'll talk. It was great talking to you again, Chris.
Thank you, my friend.